Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end-of-life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are incredibly fortunate to host Karen Faith Gordon, an expert in aging well and a dedicated advocate for holistic approaches to the aging process. Karen brings a wealth of knowledge from her extensive background in community outreach and education and her hands-on work in helping individuals age independently. In today's conversation, we'll explore a range of topics from the importance of mental and spiritual well-being as we age to the role technology is playing in enhancing the lives of our aging population. Karen, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to your podcast.
To start off, could you share your journey and what led you to focus on a holistic approach to aging?
Yes, and interestingly enough, I had an epiphany this morning in a conversation I had with my oldest son, who, when I spoke to him this morning, he had coffee with his uncle, my uncle, so it'd be his great uncle, who's 83 years old, and he said, "Oh, we had coffee and we talked," and I said, "That is so lovely," and it immediately the epiphany came with this is why I am who I am because I feel very blessed and humbled that I grew up in a family where there was engagement all the time. I was very fortunate to grow up with 4 grandparents. And
Mm.
while yes, aging happened, and yes, challenges happen with aging in terms of our well-being and our health challenges. Yes, yet overall, there was always an active engagement. And what my son, when he said that he had coffee this morning with my uncle, his uncle, our uncle. Um, and I thought, this is why I do what I do, because I loved being engaged with my grandparents. And I was so fortunate to have them into adulthood. And this, as I think about it, is part of the epiphany, is it's so counter to our cultural messaging that we lose importance and value as we age. It is the absolute opposite. We gain wisdom, we gain so much with the aging process that our younger people can benefit from, and it's often, unfortunately, missed in a culture where we become more invisible with age. And so my epiphany this morning was, sometimes people think I do what I do because I must have endured something very hard. And while it hasn't been easy, I feel very blessed to say that I it's not that came to this passion through the experience of my own role as a caregiver. It actually came through the empowerment of being engaged with adults who had the good fortune of longevity and quality of life. And I got to experience that with them into my young adulthood.
Yeah, that you are very lucky.
Yes,
For
I
one
don't take
set
it
of
for
my
granted.
grandparents, I had a very similar experience, and I was close with them, especially my grandmother on my mom's side. Um, and she even came to our wedding. She was the last remaining
Mm,
grandparent, and it was just such a wonderful. We spent the entire weekend together. We went to the wine country. It was a pretty amazing time, and I feel very lucky because I learned a lot from her.
yes, yes, and I feel similarly that I had the privilege of learning from my grandparents and aunts and uncles, and I feel even more blessed that my children now get to experience that with their grandparents and aunts and uncles. So it's definitely a blessing. It's one I do not take for granted, and it's one that I would wish everyone could experience because I think it enriches our life so much.
Yeah. And it is becoming less and less prevalent, especially with people moving all over the place.
Right,
Um, and
right,
not,
right.
yeah.
And in my work with older people, I mean, I love when my clients talk to me about those memories, and just seeing the way their face transforms. Actually, really, it's their whole body, all the energy around them changes when they take that moment to share a memory, a moment in time that is so vivid for them. And they might be 80 something now, yet that memory of their grandparent in that moment in time is as real today as it was, 70 some years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I do legacy projects, we, of course, explore the person's upbringing and their family. And it's always that same experience, really joyful. And especially when we're looking at pictures, I had one person who actually had a 50-year-old reel, tape reel,
Yeah.
and of his bar mitzvah. I think it was 50 or 60 years old. And my husband, I don't know why he has this, but God love him. He has a reel to reel player. And so we digitize the footage, but not only do you hear him, and it's a 50, 60-year-old tape, so it's not, the quality isn't great, but you hear his parents. And I'm so excited for him to hear that because I got emotional listening to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Oh, beautiful.
yeah.
It's transformative,
Yeah.
especially when we're in the conversation of grief and end of life, and what's possible in the space of reflection. We often, I don't want to ever get stuck in the past, so to speak. I want to be very cautious of hindsight, because it can be very tricky in the way it can shift a narrative that can sometimes have people thinking things that don't really support their mindset, like, oh, I would have done this or I should have done this. When we can shift into what we did have and what was wonderful about that time, and really focus on that, we can pivot somewhat away from the possibility of that negative voice getting louder in our head. So it can be very transformative when we reminisce and bring to life those joyful moments in the present moment. Yeah.
Yeah. So we spoke a little bit about family, and I know one of the big factors of remaining healthy, aging well, is socializing. Family, friends, community. What role do those play in aging well, and how can a person, as they age well, continue to keep those parts of their lives, healthy?
Yeah. It's a great question, and it's one that for some is more challenging than others, depending on their village. I say it, we say it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village for everything, to raise a life, to raise a family. And for everyone's village looks different. And there is a growing number of what is considered, there's a term, solo agers, right? So many people who made choices in their life, or didn't make a choice intentionally, but for whatever reason, they've landed at this later stage of life, um, not so well connected to community. And some solo agers are incredibly plugged in, and they're phenomenal and they're doing great. So there's no one right good way, and it's no bad wrong way. It's the way we all approach it, and let's make the best of what we have. And what makes the best of what we have is the connection with others that affirms our own journey, that we are on a journey that is shared by others. And while it may look different for each of us, when we can connect with others who are also in a space of transition and aging into new chapters of life at the later stages, that connection can be very empowering and very supportive, rather than the effects of isolation, which can be devastating.
Yeah, since COVID, yeah, I live in the
Yes.
Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, and we're a bunch of techies as it is. So we're social, but not, and I'm sorry I'm stereotyping. I hope I'm not offending anyone, but, we work from home. We meet on video, and can be very isolating. And
Yeah.
I think that the communities are seeing that. What are some practical steps that people can take? People who aren't moving into these assisted living communities, which are really social and really well thought out, and they have lots of activities. How about people who are choosing to remain from home and are isolated? What practical steps can they take?
Yeah. Again, it's going to be nuanced for each person. I'm in the Midwest. I'm in outside of Detroit, Michigan, and we are very blessed in this community to have, and I would imagine most of the people watching this are in spaces where hopefully there are community centers or um, parks and recreation centers, something townships and cities sponsor, all sorts of programming that is focused on the senior older adult demographic to provide this engagement, right? The pandemic really did a number on all of that, as we know, really decimated most of that for a couple of years, and I feel like we're in a place of rebuild at this point. um, Definitely spiritual centers, churches, synagogues, mosques, wherever your community congregates is a space that hopefully will offer someone the connection they might be seeking. Again, it is not one size fits all. In my practice as a mental health practitioner, my vision is to expand the mental health piece through the communal piece. I've created a space here for community to be cultivated and develop and connect so people can engage through physical activities such as yoga, through educational seminars that speak to what it feels like to go through a diagnosis of something that's going to fundamentally change your life. I see, a lot of people, we hear diagnosis of dementia and other life-changing, life-altering diseases that can feel at the moment of hearing the information can feel isolating because it's this sense of aloneness. And what I'm here to say is that you're not alone. I wouldn't be in the conversations I'm in all day long if each person was the only one experiencing their experience. And while it is unique to them, if they're open to come into a space that's offering something of interest to them, they are opening up themselves to a possibility of meeting a like-minded soul. And through that connection can come a rebirth in a way of life, that for some people, it hasn't been felt in a long time. And yes, for some of us, the pandemic, while it did take away some opportunities for in-person connection, yes, we created this virtual connection. And that's a positive for some. It's not for everyone and it's not available to everyone. So what I am working diligently to create is a community for people to find themselves a landing spot where they can say, yes, I like being in that spot because I know there's going to be something of interest for me to either learn or do something to engage in, and someone else is going to show up who has a similar interest to be in that same space at the same time. And that means I'm going to connect with somebody. And I think that's what this is all about. And if they don't find it through me, I truly, truly encourage my clients to check out the programming that is offered through our local agencies and organizations that want to provide this programming for this demographic.
Great, great advice. Thank you. You talked about mental health and community. Are there other things that people can do to make sure they are mentally healthy? Because I know that as you age, it becomes a critical thing to think about. So, what are your thoughts on maintaining that mental and that emotional health as a person ages? I know we talked about community. Are there other things that we can do?
I mean, if it's available to someone to still read and to do puzzles, I know a lot of my clients benefit greatly from the cognitive activities that they do to keep their mind stimulated. I mean, it's lovely when clients are engaged, if they're tech savvy and they're engaged in games that also have them in interactions with either their family or friends or other networks. Again, there's always a caveat, we want to be really careful. There is a lot out there that is unknown, especially to a generation for whom this is not familiar territory. And I'm not out there to say, go online and find new friends. No, I am here to say that vet it out in your community. I know in our community, we have programs that are specifically geared toward cognitive stimulation. So you
Mhm.
can sign up for classes that will that are designed to preserve that cognition that we is still working. I did a class myself because I like to experience what I if I'm going to ask someone to try something on for size, I like to have tried it on myself so I can speak to the experience. So I did this last year and I found it fascinating to really look at how my own cognitive reserves are functioning on a daily basis and really some, you know, take a look at what's working and where I could maybe do a little better and then also be in a space of acceptance that, you know, have this much mental real estate and I've been using a lot of it for a while now. So can I be with the fact that there are attributes that I once prided myself on that are starting to feel less accessible. Word retrieval, names and faces and putting them together. I'm not worried yet, but I do notice it. I
Yes.
notice it. And that's it. And can we notice these changes without immediately grieving a loss? Because while it can be defined as a loss as we lose certain functions or the same capacities for doing things that we always did a certain way, we can reframe it as this is where I'm at today. And I'm going to be grateful for where I'm at today. Never mind tomorrow or yesterday, you
Yeah.
know, because it's just too easy to fall into that rabbit hole.
Yeah. So that
Yeah.
sense of gratitude and being present.
Yes.
It's those are really gratitude. Is wonderful, but the being present.
Yes.
Um, how can people cultivate that presence and that acceptance really of, hey, this is where, because I talk to people who are older almost, every single day, and most are not very accepting of where they're at. It
Right.
is, I'm
Right.
sure you find that to be very common. Um,
Yes.
how do you help people cultivate that sense of acceptance?
A great question. Thank you. And so I emphasize it's not easy. And if I had an easy button, I'd probably be pressing it all day so we could all just, oh, let me press my easy button. We got this all taken care of. Um, it's a process and it is a practice. And I would never offer the idea of gratitude because we hear a lot about gratitude and I would never offer it as fluff. There's a distinction. You can be grateful, truly grateful for something that you embody or that you have, and you can also appreciate things in a way that embodies gratitude without saying, "Oh, I'm so grateful for that." You know, like so in other words, let's bring it back to the most simple thing, which isn't simple at all. We woke up today. We opened our eyes. I'm not an anatomy expert. I don't know really very much about the anatomy, but I think there's about a million systems that must be working in synchronicity with each other in order for us to wake up, breathe, see, hear, taste, feel, get dressed. And as we age, some of those functions are going to change. And it can be very challenging to accept those changes. Yet when we are mindful of what is still working, we it's putting our mind in a space of gratitude that precludes the negative stuff. There's not as much space for the resistance and frustration when you can say, you know what, I opened my eyes, I can see. It's a miracle. You know, the miracles exist when I choose to see them, so I'm going to choose to see this as the miracle it is. And then I'm going to get up and I'm so starting with those little things. It's not about I'm you can be grateful for food and shelter, of course. But I'm not talking about gratitude for material things. I'm talking about a deep gratitude for life, for waking up.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you see facing those who are aging without a traditional support network?
The biggest challenge is depression,
Mm,
anxiety. I mean, what I just said sounds really nice, and I want to be clear because I say everything with an intention of, for the most part, a collective experience, and with the understanding that I am very sensitive to the nuances of each individual experience. So, what I just said to you about, being grateful that we woke up this morning, that's not true for every person,
yeah.
especially someone who's desperately lonely or someone who's been diagnosed with a terminal illness. That's I mean, I'm asking you to flex a muscle of gratitude when you're looking at something that it puts you in despair, So it's a big ask, and I would be very sensitive, of course, in those one-on-one interactions. So I want to be very clear um that I am sensitive to the nuances. And so the greatest danger, though, to answer your question, is despair and depression. And these are huge challenges. I mean, and I'm here as a space for people to be heard, to feel seen, and to be able to speak these words, to take so much that's going on up here and put it in front of us and really look at it. Often when we illuminate these things that feel so heavy, we take away some of their power. We talk about them, we process it, and there's a lot to be said for that, and it creates a new openness to maybe reframing something and being able to look at something differently, which doesn't necessarily come easy. It doesn't come easily usually, and it doesn't necessarily happen on its own. And so I hope that in my work with people, I can encourage that kind of process. And that's the feedback that I get. People say to me, I c- I don't want to talk to or they feel as though their family and friends don't want to hear anymore about what they're going through, even if they feel that their people are there for them. And then some people truly don't feel they have anyone. And then you've got your elders who have outlived all the people who would have been there to listen to them. And so if I can hold that space, it's my greatest honor.
When I do grief work, I feel the same way because in our country, as you know, we don't do grief well, and there's an assumption or an expectation that within the first couple months you should be over it. Oh, you've grieved for 3 months, now get on with your life. After a year, oh my goodness, if you're depressed or if you're grieving after a year, oh, there's something wrong with you. And it's really unfortunate. So I do a lot. The majority of my practice is grief support.
Yeah.
And um, every single person is the same. I have friends. I have friends, I have family, but they don't want to hear it anymore. They don't understand. They don't want to hear it. And um, it's that change. We have to change that narrative. We need to normalize that conversation. Um, but I find in our society and even in our medical profession, that there isn't that room. And of course, in the professional world also, and
Yes.
that there is not room to grieve and to experience that. How can we engage as a community to support people who are older, not only in the aging process, so that they don't disappear, so that they are not invisible, but also the grieving process and making sure that they are still part of the community, that they still feel important.
Yeah. I love that question. And if this conversation can spark a movement, I'm all about it because the movement is toward connection, and connection, yes, amongst our peers, yet I'm talking about intergenerationally. Um, Ram Dass is someone, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Oh,
He was, well,
yes,
still, he somewhere out there, he's still
yeah,
amazing.
100%. His book's still here. Anyway, so he talks about the distinction between wisdom and knowledge, and how in our society we value knowledge. So in other words, you go to school, you get
Yep.
this great education, and these are valuable things. And as we age, we gain wisdom, invaluable wisdom. Someone once said to me in the most brilliant words I've ever heard, and I keep them to this day, that each time an older person dies, it's like burning down a library. You know, we gain so much as we age, and yet we are in a society that dismisses us, absolutely dismisses us. They're not looking for us when I feel like you really want to be looking for us because we have some things to say and give you some insight that you it's not a criticism. It's just that by where you are on the mountain can't give you the perspective that I now have at this place in the mountain. I don't have the perspective of this place on the mountain. I have the great privilege and honor of being with people on a daily basis who do have that lens. I learn from them, and I would, if I could pay that forward, and I try, and I want to, and that looks like educating. It looks like engaging with young adults and then I mean, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir and kind of repeating what's probably been said for millennia. Yet, I'm here to say it again, appreciate the wisdom that exists around you and engage with it because it is invaluable to your own life and to the life of our society and greater culture.
Yeah. I feel that there aren't places for that though. I mean, in religious organizations, yes, you get a
Yeah.
very,
Yeah.
unfortunately, in most religious communities now, the people who are attending services and really active are older people, and you see less and less
Yeah.
of the younger
Yeah.
generation going. But you know, 100 years ago, people lived together. People lived in the same community where,
Right.
grandma's right there.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
now we don't have that because I mean, I know I live
Right.
far. My family's in Chicago.
And as my kids have grown up, even the way in which the context of inviting older adults into school programming and whatnot, I
Mm,
noticed the languaging being modified from grandparent to grandfriend. And I think it's wonderful because it's inclusive. Because to your point, we're not all staying in our same villages and we're creating our own unique, eclectic villages based on where we live and what our interests are and what our work and our children and our everything. And something that I really want to do here, and I've actually talked to someone about it, is creating intergenerational programming in my group space that would invite um, generational, different age groups in to play games that are relevant to both generations. And what I mean by that is I came across some board games that are familiar to me from my childhood in the 70s, whatever, like Life and just
yeah,
certain, and they still exist, right? Yet these were geared to be able to, I think, and I have to go back and look, but I reached out to a local toy store owner, and I asked her if she had these games, and if she did, if we could somehow collaborate to both reach out to our mutual audiences and see what could be created to create a game night that is specifically geared toward interconnecting the generations,
that's wonderful.
because not only would it be fun, I think it would be funny. I mean, I hear laughter when I think about that room being filled with adults and kids answering each other's questions from such different perspectives, and not with technology but with the tactile games, like a real board game and conversation and looking at people in the eye, and we won't have phones in the room. So, I mean, and again, all due respect, phones have their place. Everything has its place. It's just that what we tend to do in our society, at least by my observation, is we swing the pendulum too far. We everything is really great, and then we go too far one way, too far the other way. And somehow, how can we meet each other where we're at?
Yeah, yeah. That I love that idea of game night. I love that you mentioned Ram Dass also, and uh, I have the book, still here. Funny story, when my mom turned 40, I actually bought her that book. And I think she was so offended by it. Like, she never read it. I think she was offended that I got her that book. But yeah, I actually read it instead. But
Oh, it's so full of goodness,
yes,
so much richness to discuss. And I did a discussion group here and based the discussion group on that book. I mean, it's so dog-eared that it's like I've got a tab on every single page. I could open up to any page. I didn't really make an agenda. I just knew I could open his book and say, oh, and then we could just talk about it because everyone in the room was it doesn't matter again if the experience is exactly the same. The plot lines all differ, the characters differ, uh, yet there's a sameness. There's space for affirmation of the experience when the emotions can be there's a lot of synergy in the emotions that come up through
yeah,
those experiences. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
W- Are there any common misconceptions that you've encountered about aging well?
I mean, I, like everyone else, hear about all the things. Do this to be this, do this to be that. Um, I'm not one to jump on the I'm not an early adopter of medications, and it actually pains me to see the kinds of messaging that's out there in the world. We have come so far in our medical advancements toward being able to treat disease and to hopefully create better quality of life for people. I think what has been missed so greatly over this period of time of focus on living longer. I grew up in an era of, oh, we're going to live longer, we're going to live longer. That all the focus was on quantity. We never talk about quality. I mean, okay, you're celebrating 75 years of marriage. Awesome. I hope it's been awesome. How has it really been? Like we celebrate these milestones without asking what it really looks like to be in that body, in that relationship. So I'm not here to say that we shouldn't live a long life. I'm here to say we each have our own individual longevity. And all that matters to me personally is that there's quality to that life. In the book Being Mortal, you might have heard of it. It's yeah.
Yeah,
So
I heard of it somewhere. Yeah, yeah,
that this quote it just rings so true. Are we prolonging life or are we prolonging death?
yeah,
And tragically, because so many because of the way our culture depicts getting older, people are scared. They're scared of it. So young, I once was on a field trip 100 years ago with one of my kids, and I was a parent chaperone. I was so excited to be in this older adult community, right, with the kids to have interaction. And I went to the bathroom, and there were a bunch of girls in there. The kids were maybe 10 at that time. I said, "Girls, what's happening?" And one of them said, "I'm scared of people." And it broke my heart, and I said and it was a moment for me to be able to pause and say, "They were once you.
yeah.
They were once you. They have stories, the things you read about in books, they lived. Ask them." And so, um, really that's part of this movement is changing that narrative around aging being a disease in and of itself,
Yeah.
that it is all bad. It's not that I heard was a wonderful conference the other day, and offline we can talk about some of the speakers that spoke to this topic. They were stellar, but it's not that we're necessarily afraid of dying. We're afraid of getting dead. That was how one of the doctors, because we don't want to suffer.
Yeah.
And so when old age or getting older is depicted as just a series of losses and suffering, then how are we capitalizing on the wisdom that's there and the knowledge that we can actually share with each other and glean from each other, but
Yeah.
we lose that in the narrative of fear.
Yeah.
And this society is really good at making us afraid of aging.
Oh, definitely. I love that you bring up quality versus quantity of life. And, you know, are you living or are you just extending dying?
Yeah.
A lot, let's talk about planning and advanced directives and all of that good stuff. But, people are really afraid. I know, and I tell stories about my family and I hope that they don't mind. But my parents, as an example, they do not have advanced directives because they're too afraid of having that conversation. Um, and I had like a second cousin who was very sick for a long time and was in memory care, had a feeding tube, and I remember talking about it with my brother, and who was the health power of attorney. And he said, "Well, we were talking about what we wanted and what our parents wanted." And he goes, "Well, with the feeding tube, um, she looked okay. She wasn't, she had dementia, but so it's almost like a 2-year-old." That's what he likened her to. And he's like, 2-year-olds are happy." And I said, "At that point, you're not extending life, you're extending death, because the body's natural way of dying is
Yeah.
to stop eating and to stop drinking, especially in dementia." And so you're and it's uncomfortable if you're forcing. It's like a sponge, right? When you put water in a dry sponge, it expands, and so that's what you're doing. It's uncomfortable for people, and but it is, we're so driven in our society to remain here longer. Let's remain here as long as possible. And there are many reasons for it, not only within, our own fairs, but we could get into a whole big discussion about the medical community, and which we won't hear. But it is really unfortunate that we don't look at quality of life.
Yeah, and you named something just then when you were speaking that is so critically important and again is either forgotten, overlooked, or not even realized by people who are extending by all means and all measures the life of someone who is really intended physically to be shutting down. When a person cannot articulate their pain or distress, you people again, it pains me because you are what are you doing when you are extending someone's life for the sake of that life to be extended because you have because there's the medical equipment to keep someone alive. They don't have the ability to opt into that conversation at that point. They're not able to articulate, this hurts. I'm in pain. I'm in distress. I am a very firm believer in allowing the body to do what it needs to do. This is why I am such a strong believer and advocate of hospice, of giving quality of life to whatever life remains. It's not about extending it, it's not about hastening it. It's about giving quality to that time that remains. And that's what gets missed in these take all measures to keep someone's heart beating, you know?
Yeah, we do not take advantage of hospice. I am a huge advocate of it. I think we need to start seeing hospice as not a place to die, but I'm going to say something so not PC, but a place to get the good drugs, to make us feel good, to make us feel not pain, right? Because that's really what
Right.
hospice is there for. One of the things that hospice is there for, to make us as comfortable as possible. And it doesn't mean you're going to be, I have worked with people who have been in hospice for a year, who just, it's not a place. Yes, you're dying, but it's not a place that you go to die. It is an
Right.
extension. This is another stage of your life. This is the final stage of your life. And how you choose to live that is really important. Unfortunately, as you know, people don't take advantage of hospice. A lot of people who give probably you and I both, our calls are, you know, my parent has only a week to live. Can you come and help? And I've worked with families in both instances where they work with me with advanced directive. I really get to know I become a part, an extension of the family almost. And I go through them, I walk with them through the
Yeah.
entire process. And that's really beautiful. And
Yes.
and then there's the other side of that
Yeah.
coin where it's, hey, my loved one has a week to live. And that is really unfortunate seeing that happen. So when you work with your clientele, um, how do you emphasize that importance of planning ahead for aging and then beyond aging? How do you work with that?
Well, I frame it to the person who's resistant to the conversation, for example, a parent or parents, I frame it as you're you're giving your children a gift. I frame it as a gift. That I frame the conversation as a gift that will pay itself forward by preventing strife that might otherwise happen in the aftermath of death, which is she didn't want that. Well, I know she wanted that. That's what she told me. Well, you didn't hear her right because I heard her say that. Let's have the conversation when we're of sound mind, and let's state our wishes such that our family, whether it's our children, our spouse, our siblings, whoever it may be, let's have the conversation such that we're gifting them, that they get to gift us by giving us what we wished for, by following and adhering to the wishes that we stated in our clear, sound mind. There's no argument around it. If this is what I stated I wanted and you're committed to honoring my wishes, then I've given you the gift of knowledge. We've both opted into this conversation, and now you can gift me, now that I've passed, with honoring the wishes I stated.
I totally agree with you. And those conversations are tough to have. And so having someone from outside the family help facilitate those, um, it's really important. I don't think that people realize when you create your advanced directive, it's not about filling, just checking off what you want,
Right.
because what's on that piece of paper, the only part of that piece of paper that's legally binding is that healthcare advocate, that power, healthcare power of attorney. And because there are so many things that two pieces of paper cannot take into account. And so
Right.
those conversations and having a third party really facilitate them is important.
And I want to be really transparent always. Again, not easy. And I've had this conversation. I remember having it with my own in-laws, and it was still a hard no from them to have the conversation. So I'm not here to say, just say this and it's all going to be, if it goes that way, I'm so thrilled for you. What you, what we're saying here is that the conversation is an important one to have, and it's a very challenging one to have amongst family members or spouses or whomever. And bringing in that neutral third party can illuminate our blind spots, allow us to look at things and talk about things in a way that is much less heightened. I mean, it can be heightened emotionally. It can definitely, things can get really intense. However, the escalation from 0 to 360 can be, that dial can be turned way down in a very in a very in a way that allows everyone's voice to be heard, and to allow everyone to process the information. It's very heavy information and it's
Yeah.
morbid, and people don't want to talk about aging and mortality, especially their own or their loved ones. So if I can be a voice in that conversation, people are often surprised. I'm proud to say happily surprised that they're able to say things that they couldn't say sitting on the couch at home or around the kitchen table. And those are, and it's understandable. It really is. It's not bad or wrong. It's that we as humans are pretty messy, and the way in which we communicate, especially in our families. I mean, we're creatures of habit, so we're going to fall into similar patterns over and over and over again until there's an interruption. And it can be a gentle, kind interruption from someone who has been in these conversations and can guide them to a more productive outcome.
Yeah. I think part of that fair is, yeah, we're talking about death, as you said. These are really morbid conversations, but I think if you switch that narrative and, we're talking about your quality of life, your last few days, your last weeks. We're not talking about you dying. It's going to happen regardless, but we're talking about your quality of life and what you want that to look like.
Exactly. And
Um,
you learn a lot about each other in these conversations.
oh yeah.
I mean, it even happened, with my husband and I when we made it was like, we're all different. We all have our own approach and our own fears and our own perspectives and understandings. And to me, it's pretty clear, though, in this conversation is to talk about exactly what you said, how to minimize discomfort and create the best quality of life when we're approaching that end of life
Yeah.
transition.
So let's step back and talk a little about nutrition, physical health, just swinging the other way now. You spoke about before about medication and how you are hesitant to just jump on that bandwagon for new medications.
Yeah.
And there's a lot out there on nutrition, what people should be eating, a lot of confusion, probably like there's a confusion about medication, uh, a lot of confusion on nutrition and how can people or where can people go to find that information of, hey, what can I be doing? Because nutrition is, food is medicine, right? I mean, and enjoyment. I'm not going to say it's not enjoyment, but
No, and to your point, and with regard to medication, I also am very, very aware of the polypharmacy that goes on, and there's the adverse effects that rise exponentially the more we add medications. When medications work, of course, I'm going to support and encourage that. My concern is when people have, when there's a false hope. I want to know that there's efficacy for certain things. Again, with dementia being something that is so commonly talked about these days, I'm hearing through the experiences of my clients about different treatments and different ways of approaching this medically. And if it helps them, even if it's a placebo effect and it's not hurting them, I can support that. Again, so I guess like I said, I don't want to minimize, and I don't want to dismiss the importance of medication and how far we've come and we've advanced. With food, I would definitely turn to food first. And I have gotten to know in my own community some really amazing naturopathic doctors. And that's my go-to at this point. I mean, I see my medical doctor myself. Western medicine has its place for sure. And there is so much to be said for the ways in which we can feed our mind and body and spiritually, emotionally. Um, I heard say something, sitting is the new smoking, so many of the people that I see, again, when we're isolated, there's a very easy path to being sedentary, and that is very dangerous. And we all, it's something like, it's not rocket science. I think we all pretty much kind of know this intuitively. It's what's going to motivate us to actually do something about it. And food is the same way, we get to be uh, smart about our choices, and we get to be able to assess and discern and make choices that are to our betterment. Not it, again, it sounds so easy, and it can be, right? I mean, if we're approaching it mindfully, it can be. And I'm someone who has been practicing now. It for me, it's through my yoga practice and through the philosophies of yoga and through the community that I've met through my practice. that I've come in contact with all these wonderful people, practitioners in the community of all different holistic modalities that I truly, truly find to be of great benefit. And I'm sure there are websites, and I'm sure I could name them, maybe not off the top of my head. And I forgive me for speaking so locally. I'm so being so hyper local, but I know that all of these practitioners that I know, just as I am, connected to people nationally, internationally, through our networks and through the associations that we affiliate with as professionals so that we can learn from each other. So I'm always happy to ask the question. If you said, well, Karen, who do you know in the Bay Area? Well, let me reach out to my colleague or someone I might know in the Bay Area to say, this is who I would say this is the person to go to. So it does take some research and exploration. And I would say that it exists. These natural remedies do work. And uh, yeah, it's
Thank you.
yeah,
So
thank you.
I know that we're at the top of the hour, the end of our
Yeah,
time here.
yeah,
Thank you. I have one more question for you, and then we'll wrap it up. The
yeah.
role of technology um, in
Mhm,
aging is becoming increasingly significant. Are
mhm.
there any particular are there any particular technologies or innovations that you find that are helpful?
I would like to go backwards. I would like someone to give me a remote control with 4 buttons, on, off, up, down. That's all I need. That's all I want. Um, so I just gave you the opposite answer. Are there technologies? Yes. Yes. For those, I mean, my gosh, one of my clients the other day was showing me how his technology on his phone is connected to his hearing aids and can literally, based on the context or the setting, the environment where he is, he can adapt his hearing aids by his phone to the room that he's in to optimize his hearing. That's amazing. Wow. I mean, talk about a miracle. That is amazing. Okay. I love that. And it's too much anymore. I mean, telling I it's I see the bright spots, and again, because I'm immersed in these conversations all day, I see the challenges. Don't ask me to get an app to get that done. Can I please call somebody and talk to a human, not a robot? Um when I was a young social worker in the early 90s, the biggest challenge at that, I was working in housing in a HUD subsidized housing at the time. And the biggest challenge I remember was the advent of the phone tree. So at that time, I would have the people who lived in the building, their biggest frustration and what I would navigate with them was a phone tree, calling somewhere and not getting a person, getting a dial one for this, two for that, three for that. I mean, we're so far past that now, right? Yet it just gives some perspective on, the challenges then and the challenges now. So, yes, there are wonderful technologies. And with some of the disease processes that go on, especially with dementia, there are wonderful, wonderful technologies that are being created to and designed to capitalize on whatever cognitive reserves we have. And I appreciate that. And I applaud those efforts. And I still say, swing that pendulum back a little bit, please. There's room for simplicity here too. It doesn't always have to be so complex. I literally want to turn on the TV. That's all I want to do. Just turn it on and get to what I'm looking for. And I got to be honest, it's not that simple for me anymore. I gotta ask my kids, and that's okay too. But, they're grown, and so, as adults, as humans, what do we seek the most in our life is self-determination and autonomy, and in so many ways, technology has heightened that capacity for us to be in control, right? Yet let's think about it, what it looks like for those of us on the other side of a certain age range, where in some ways it's not empowering to me. It can be very deflating and depleting and disempowering when something that would seemingly be simple is no longer, and the technology complicates it for me. And I don't mean me, I mean a collective group of people. So like with everything else we've talked about, there's the pros and the cons, right? And we get to navigate all of it. Yeah.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for being here today and giving, me and everyone your gift of time. It is really a gift. Thank you.
Thank you.
If if people want to learn more about your work or get in touch with you, how can they?
My website is karenfaith.llc. The community space is called Elements Every Day, which can be found once you're on the Karen Faith website. You can also find the community space through that website. If anyone were to have a question, any kind of inquiry, they can reach me through my website, through they can call the office. I am always happy to hear and be able to offer support. It may not be me that's going to be the one working one-on-one, yet if I can give you a resource that allows you to take that next step forward, I want to be able to do that. So and again, so my website, email, phone, I'm open to the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Folks, Karen's holistic approach reminds us that aging well is within everyone's reach, whether it's building stronger community ties, maintaining our mental health, or planning ahead. Each step she's outlined can lead to a more fulfilling and independent older age. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions about today's topic, please feel free to comment below or reach out to me directly. And if you found this conversation to be helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Every bit of engagement helps us bring more of these meaningful discussions to you. This is Traci Arieli from Comforting Closure, wishing you peace and comfort in your journey. Until next time, take care.